Before Brian was even born, the unthinkable happened. Aliens abducted his mother, Molly Westwood. It happened one night. They took her in the dark and never returned. There were no clues, no trace of where she had gone. Her alien abductors came from a race that would sometimes gather samples from more primitive, non-spacefaring races for study. The alternatives would be to land on a world and make direct contact, or to blend in with the subjects in a covert operation, both of which involve significant risks. Primitives are rife with superstition and fear that renders them far too dangerous for direct contact, especially in numbers. The standard operating procedure is to bring back isolated samples and learn from them. Her selection was quite arbitrary. She lived alone in a fairly isolated place, and others would not see her abduction and raise alarm or otherwise provoke the indigenous population. Earth was a closed world to all spacefaring races, except for the occasional scientific study. Exposure to the humans was prohibited, and ever since they reached out with space probes, the moon and other planets within the Sol system were off limits too. The aliens took Molly back in a space cruiser to their homeworld, to live there the rest of her life as their guest. They couldn't return her to Earth because they'd contaminated her with knowledge of her hosts in their more advanced technology. They'd not risk her disturbing the status quo back on Earth. A missing person is one thing, but one that later reappears with knowledge of alien abduction would be too much. To tamper with her memory was a risky prospect, usually resulting in little more than a vegetable. So for Molly, the journey to their homeworld was a one-way trip. It took a few weeks aboard the space cruiser to get to their homeworld, during which they confined Molly to her quarters. The aliens provided for her basic needs, but otherwise left her alone. She was the subject of a study into primitive species, which meant that she wasn't to be disturbed. The protocol for transferring samples was to limit interactions with the sample that could contaminate and invalidate the study. After an uneventful journey, the space cruiser arrived at its destination, and they escorted Molly to living quarters on the planet, which was her new home. Tian studied their subjects through observation and interaction. They'd keep Molly as their guest for the rest of her life, while they learned about humans. As a single subject, she posed little risk to the Tians. The place that was provided for Molly was nicer than her former home, but for her it was still a prison. There was no lock on the door, and she was free to go out and explore. But being alone in an alien world, she felt little desire to venture out. They observed her both directly and indirectly as she went about her new life. The aliens, known as Tians, pronounced Tians, would study her daily. She felt like an exhibit in a zoo. Tians were mostly peaceful, and they welcomed visitors from other starfaring races for trade and other mutual benefits. Her abduction was part of the equivalent of an anthropology experiment conducted by the Tian Science Academy. She was the only human and one of a few specimens from primitive races collected for study, although she met no other subjects. It sounded good if you were the ones doing the studying, but not much fun if you were the subject. Tians looked roughly human, but without hair and shorter. Their skin was pale, and they wore clothing that was mostly uniform or plain in design. Their mannerisms were cold and reserved, or at least that's what Molly thought. The Tian scientists were cautious not to contaminate the suspect with their own communication, so they remained distant. The unfortunate result was a reinforcement of the feeling of isolation she felt. One thing Molly's abductors had not planned for was the birth of her son Brian, who arrived about 6 months after her arrival. He was an unexpected bonus for the Tian scientists. He provided both another human to study and much-needed human company for his mother. The birth went smoothly. Molly was glad to have her son, but sad they would never see his father. Molly bonded with the little bundle of joy, determined to raise him as best she could in this alien prison. She named him Brian after her grandfather. Brian learned both about Earth and being human from his mother. Once he was old enough to venture outside, he learned of the world of his birth, known as Ch.1. Molly taught her son to speak English, and she tried to teach him reading and writing, but she had no Earth books to read, and only she could read his writing. Eventually she gave up, glad she at least had someone to talk with in English. Unknown to Molly, the Tian scientists had a collection of books and documents they'd gathered for their studies of Earth. They also had many hours of TV and radio broadcasts. That Google's, she was unaware of them, and the scientists never thought to offer. The Tians provided for Molly and Brian's needs, but with things of Tian origin. Things like furniture, utensils, clothing, and toys. To Brian, it was all quite normal as he grew up with a human mother and surrounded by alien items. A good thing of note, Brian's birth on Tian Prime earned him a full Tian citizenship, complete with an identification chip, which was encoded and embedded in his arm. He was perhaps the first ever citizen who wasn't of the Tian race. At least he never met another like him. The Tians explained to Molly that it was in their laws and constitution that granted his citizenship. He would grow to become a member of their society with all rights and privileges. In comparison, Molly was a subject of their study, something like a lab rat. Molly's status equated to that of a guest. She had no path to citizenship, but would remain a guest, free of responsibility. Under the standard terms of the study of primitive species, they would provide for her needs and protect her. She would never return to Earth, though. As a Tian citizen, Brian received a full education, and he proved to be an exceptional student. Brian studied hard and learned everything he could. He mastered multiple languages, both written and oral. His progress amazed his teachers, and they encouraged him to study all that he wanted. His progress also got him unwanted attention. He learned to keep a low profile, and he developed the skills to avoid trouble. Time passed, and Brian grew older. He kept up with his studies. He put in the extra effort, and it showed. At 14 cycles, he had earned the respect of his teachers and classmates. He behaved in a very Tian-like manner in public and was indistinguishable from Tians, except for the physical differences. He learned to blend in was the best way to keep a low profile. Others initially saw him as strange, but eventually they get used to him, and he would be just another Tian. The difference between Tians and humans wasn't so much one of developmental, but knowledge and technology. Brian grew up believing he was Tian, and he acted accordingly. He could keep up with and even exceed his peers. His progress impressed his teachers, who soon revised their expectations. Before long, Brian was the top student in all his classes. Molly never got over her abduction. She saw herself as a prisoner, living in a nightmare. She refused to cooperate with her alien captors, rarely leaving her living quarters and not learning their language. Molly taught her son to speak English and would only use English with him. She didn't understand why he would even interact with the aliens. Often, Molly felt depressed, and she blocked out everything that reminded her of life on Tian Prime. Brian cared about his mother, but as a child he was ill-equipped to help. Her distance from him helped push him to succeed at his studies. He worked hard to be a success so that his mother might feel better. Of course, his efforts had the reverse effect, but he was too young to understand then. Brian knew he couldn't visit Earth, and by now understood why. Genetically, he was human, but wasn't normal because of his upbringing. He was born on Tian Prime with all the learning of a Tian citizen. There were no countries or other divisions in Tian society, which made more sense to him than the primitive culture on Earth. His education on Tian Prime had him far ahead of his mother and those of her home planet. He had no claim to a life there, nor did it appeal to him. Brian identified with Tian Prime more than Earth. He was Tian in all ways except genetics. His fellow students were Tian, not human. They were friendly enough to Brian. The only human he knew was his mother, and she was perpetually sad. Her example of what it was to be human didn't appeal to him. If Earth was full of people like his mother, it must be a sad place indeed. As Brian progressed, he studied astrophysics, stellar cartography, and navigation. He understood he lived among the stars and he saw his future there. He studied how hyperdrive technology allowed travel between star systems, and his enthusiasm caused him to excel in his studies. One night, a little after he was 16 cycles of age, Brian had a strange dream. He knew it was a dream because he woke up remembering it. It was strange because he rarely recalled any details from his dreams. He dreamt that when he closed his eyes and looked into the darkness, a pair of eyes opened and stared back at him. They resembled his eyes, except they were green and only a meter away from his face. He saw nothing else, but he could tell they had eyelids. because the eyes blinked occasionally. He heard no words spoken in that dark place. The eyes just looked at him. They didn't appear to be Tian. They might even be human. He didn't have enough evidence to be certain. He thought perhaps they belonged to a girl. Brian experienced a mixture of surprise and awe and feared opening his eyes lest the dream ended. It was like he'd turned a corner one dark night and stumbled into someone. He didn't know what to do. So he remained motionless, waiting for what would happen next. He sensed no menace in those eyes, rather something positive. He wasn't afraid. Rather, he felt drawn towards them. That was all he recalled the next morning. He didn't understand what the dream meant, but it had to be important. He tried to sketch what he had seen, but he wasn't that good at drawing, so eventually he gave up trying.